I'm Kara Sterling, 29 years old, and I just finalized the sale of my first fintech startup for $500,000. For most people, that kind of money means a Lamborghini or a down payment on a penthouse. But for me, it meant only one thing: survival. I sat at my granite kitchen island, the signed contract still sitting in my email inbox, and I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 years. My mother was dying. The doctors had given her 6 months unless we could get her into a specialized immunotherapy trial in Zurich, and the deposit alone was $200,000. I had hustled, I had barely slept, and I had coded until my eyes bled to build my company just for this moment. I picked up my phone with a trembling hand, ready to be the hero my family needed. I opened my banking app. Face ID scanned my features. The little loading wheel spun for a second that felt like an eternity. I was ready to see that beautiful, life-saving number with all those zeros. The screen refreshed. My heart didn't just sink, it vanished. Balance, $0. I blinked. I actually rubbed my eyes with the back of my hand and looked again, assuming it was a glitch in the UI or a server error. Balance, $0. The silence in my apartment suddenly became deafening, a high-pitched ring starting in my ears. My hand started to shake, a violent tremor that started in my fingertips and shot up to my shoulders. I couldn't hold the grip. My phone slipped from my sweat-slicked palm and smashed face down onto the hard tile floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I didn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the pain as my kneecaps hit the ceramic, and scrambled to flip the phone over. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, but the display was still on. I frantically tapped the transaction history tab, my fingernails clicking against the broken glass. Red text, wall-to-wall red text. 50,000 transfer to B sterling. 50,000 transfer to B sterling. $100,000 transfer to B sterling. I scrolled down, gasping for air like I was drowning. Every single withdrawal had a timestamp from this morning, starting exactly 3 hours ago. B sterling. Beatrice, my sister. My vision blurred, hot tears stinging the corners of my eyes, but this wasn't sadness. This was pure, unadulterated horror. Last year, I had gone in for an appendectomy, and in a moment of vulnerability, I had added Beatrice as an authorized user on my main account for emergency access only. I trusted her. She was my big sister. She was the one who held my hand when Dad left. She was the one who swore she would do anything to help Mom get better. I looked at the timestamps again. She had drained my entire life's work, the money meant to save our mother's life, in less than 180 minutes. I tapped the phone icon and dialed her number, my throat so tight I thought I might vomit. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Beatrice. I'm probably out living my best life, so leave a message." Her cheerful voice felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I looked back at the banking app, at the zero balance, and then at the photo of my mother on the fridge. Beatrice didn't just steal my money. She signed our mother's death warrant. I didn't stop dialing. I paced the length of my kitchen like a caged animal, pressing the green call button the millisecond the voicemail beep kicked in. 1 call, 2 calls, 10 calls. My thumb was cramping, but I couldn't feel it. I only felt the blood pounding in my ears, a rhythmic thumping that matched the frantic beat of my heart against my ribs. 20 calls. I was hyperventilating, short, sharp gasps of air that didn't seem to fill my lungs. 30 calls, the ringing stopped, the line clicked open. "Kara, babe," her voice wasn't guilty, it wasn't fearful. It was a sickeningly sweet giggle slurred slightly at the edges like she was floating on a cloud. I gripped the phone so hard the cracked glass bit into my skin. "Beatrice," I choked out, my voice sounding ragged and unrecognizable to my own ears. What did you do? Where is the money? Oh, don't start with that tone, she purred, and I heard the distinct, sharp rustle of expensive fabric moving. I'm just finally taking what I deserve, okay? Deserve? I screamed, the sound tearing at my throat. That is $500,000. That is Mom's life, Beatrice. She needs that transfer for Zurich tomorrow. A loud pop echoed through the speaker. It was unmistakable. A champagne cork. Then came the fizzing sound of liquid pouring into crystal, followed by the raucous laughter of strangers in the background. You always had everything, Kara, she said, her voice dropping into a petty, venomous whisper that made my stomach turn over. Little Miss Perfect with her scholarships and her startups and her big, important plans. Beatrice, listen to me. No, you listen, she snapped, cutting me off. It's finally my turn to live the high life in the city. Do you know how hard it is watching you play rich girl while I scrape by? I'm done scraping. I wasn't playing rich, I sobbed, tears finally spilling hot and fast down my cheeks. I was working, I was saving for Mom. Boring, she sing-songed, drifting away from the phone for a second to shout something unintelligible to someone nearby. More bubbly over here. The bass of loud, thumping club music swelled in the background, vibrating through the speaker and into my skull. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. I physically couldn't stand up anymore. I slumped against the refrigerator, sliding down until I hit the cold floor, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Beatrice, please, I begged, abandoning all pride. Send it back, she will die, do you hear me? Mom will die. Oh my God, stop being so dramatic, she huffed, sounding bored. She'll be fine, you always figure it out, right? You're the smart one, let me enjoy my night. Beatrice, don't you Bye sis, love you. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mouth hanging open, my brain unable to process the cruelty I had just witnessed. I immediately hit redial. One ring, then a sharp, mechanical tone. The number you have dialed is not accepting calls at this time. I opened my text messages, my fingers flying across the keyboard to type a plea. Message not delivered. I scrambled to open Instagram, hoping to see where she was, to see who she was with. I typed her handle into the search bar. User not found. I tried Facebook. Content not available. She hadn't just stolen the money. She had erased me. I sat alone on my kitchen floor, surrounded by the silence of my empty apartment, realizing with terrifying clarity that the person I shared DNA with had just left me, and our mother for dead. I didn't even grab a jacket. I sprinted out of my building and threw myself into my car, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. My hands were shaking so violently that I dropped my keys twice before I could jam them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a guttural growl that matched the scream building in my throat. I peeled out of the parking garage, the tires screeching against the concrete, the smell of burning rubber filling my nostrils. I hit the highway and floored it. The speedometer climbed 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. I wove through traffic like a maniac, ignoring the angry honks and the flashing high beams of the cars I cut off. My vision was a watery mess of red brake lights and street lamps, blurred by hot, angry tears that wouldn't stop falling. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, my fingernails digging into the leather until I thought it might tear. Every heartbeat was a hammer against my ribs. Zurich. Mom. Beatrice. The names cycled through my mind in a nauseating loop. I reached her apartment complex in record time, screeching to a halt in a fire lane because I couldn't waste seconds finding a spot. I left the car running. I didn't care if it got towed. I didn't care if it got stolen. I ran up the 3 flights of stairs, my lungs burning, my legs heavy as lead. I reached apartment 3B and didn't even bother knocking. I pounded on the wood with my fists, putting my entire body weight into every blow. Beatrice, I screamed, my voice raw and cracking. Open the door, silence. I hit it again, harder this time. Beatrice, I know you're in there. I kept pounding. I pounded until the skin on my knuckles split. I pounded until I saw smears of bright red blood staining the beige paint of her doorframe. I was sobbing now, incoherent pleas mixed with guttural screams of rage. The door across the hall creaked open. I spun around, my chest heaving, ready to beg for help or fight whoever stood there. It was an elderly woman in a floral housecoat, clutching a small dog that was trembling almost as much as I was. She looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. "Honey," she said softly, her voice wavering, "she's not there." I wiped my face with the back of my bloody hand, smearing tears and grit across my cheek. "She has to be," I choked out. "I just talked to her. She has my money." The woman shook her head slowly. "I saw the moving truck this morning," she said. "At 6:00 a.m. They took everything." The world tilted on its axis. "What?" I whispered. "She moved out," the neighbor confirmed. "She gave me her potted plants, said she was going on a long vacation and wasn't coming back." I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. I turned back to the door and tried the handle, locked. I didn't stop. I ran back down the stairs, two at a time, risking a broken ankle, and hammered on the superintendent's door on the first floor. It took him 5 minutes to answer, 5 minutes where I felt my sanity fraying like an old rope. When he finally opened up, looking annoyed and tired, I didn't give him a chance to speak. "Open 3B, I demanded, breathless. "Now, it's an emergency." He looked at my wild eyes, at the blood on my hands, and he didn't argue. He grabbed his master key ring, the metal jingling like a taunt, and followed me back up the stairs. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of abandonment, dust, stale air, and the chemical tang of industrial cleaner. I stepped inside. It was empty. Not just tidy, hollow. The beige sofa where we used to watch movies was gone. The bookshelf where she kept her collection of fashion magazines was gone. There were rectangular pale spots on the walls where pictures used to hang, ghost outlines of the life she had just packed up and driven away. I walked into the center of the living room, my footsteps echoing loudly against the bare hardwood floors. "She broke the lease," the super grunted from the doorway, checking a clipboard he had brought up. "Paid the penalty in cash 2 days ago, said she came into some money." 2 days ago, I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I walked toward the kitchen. On the floor, right where her small dining table used to be, was a pile of trash. I looked down at it. It wasn't just garbage, it was papers. I crouched down, my knees cracking, and picked up a crumpled piece of mail. It was a credit card offer. I picked up another, a brochure for a luxury resort in the Maldives. I picked up a third piece of paper, smoothing it out with trembling fingers. It was a printout of a flight itinerary. One way, first class, departure date today. I looked at the date on the bottom of the printout. She had booked this 3 months ago. I dropped the paper as if it burned me. I stood up slowly, the room spinning around me. This wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment. This wasn't an impulsive act of greed triggered by seeing the balance in my account. She had been planning this. While I was coding until sunrise to build my company, she was planning. While I was holding Mom's hand during chemo treatments, she was planning. While I was trusting her with the access codes to my life, she was waiting for the check to clear so she could execute her exit strategy. I looked around the empty, silent apartment. The hot, frantic fire of my anger was gone. In its place, a cold, sharp bitterness settled into my bones, heavier than lead and colder than ice. I wasn't just a victim of theft. I was the punchline to a joke she had been writing for months. I stood in the center of that empty room, the silence pressing against my eardrums, and I realized something terrifying. I didn't have a sister anymore. I had an enemy, and she had a head start. I'm Tamsin Vance, 29 years old, and until 48 hours ago, I was a successful software engineer with enough money in the bank to save my dying mother's life. Now, I was sitting in a hard plastic chair at the 12th precinct, watching a police officer pick at a hangnail while my world crumbled. So, let me get this straight, Officer Miller drawled, not even looking up from his notepad. You put her name on the account. I had to, I explained, my voice trembling with an urgency he clearly didn't share. I went in for emergency spinal surgery last year. I needed someone to pay my bills while I was under heavy sedation and recovery. I never took her off because I trusted her. He finally looked up, his eyes dull and devoid of empathy. Then it's not theft, Ms. Vance. My jaw dropped. Excuse me. If she's an authorized signer on the account, she has a legal right to withdraw funds, he said, closing his notebook with a finality that sounded like a gunshot. It doesn't matter if she took $5 or 500,000. In the eyes of the law, she just withdrew her own money. It's not her money, I shouted, standing up so abruptly my chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. It's for a heart transplant. It's specifically earmarked for the clinic in Zurich. She knows that. That's a civil dispute, he said, waving a hand dismissively toward the door. You can sue her, but we can't arrest her. I stared at him, my vision blurring at the edges. She is leaving the country, I whispered, the horror choking me. She is on a plane right now. If you don't stop her, that money is gone forever. Sorry, he grunted, already turning his attention to a stack of paperwork. Next. I stumbled out of the precinct, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly. I fumbled for my phone and dialed my lawyer, praying for a different answer. He picked up on the second ring. Tamsin, I heard, he said, his voice grave. Tell me you can freeze it, I begged, walking blindly down the precinct steps. Tell me you can get a court order. I can file for an injunction, he said, and I heard the dreaded but in his tone. But Tamsin, without a criminal charge, the burden of proof is on us. It will take weeks to get a hearing, years to get a judgment. I don't have years, I screamed into the receiver, startling a passerby. Mom has maybe a month. I need that money now. And even if we win, he continued, his voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper that made me want to vomit. If she spends it or moves it to an offshore account we can't touch. A judgment is just a piece of paper. It costs $10,000 just to start the retainer for this kind of international litigation. Silence stretched between us. I have $40 in my checking account, I whispered. I'm sorry, Tamsin, he said gently. There's nothing I can do. I hung up. The sky, which had been gray all morning, finally broke open. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking through my thin blouse in seconds, plastering my hair to my face. I didn't run for cover. I walked slowly to my car, the water mixing with the tears I could no longer hold back. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The sound of the rain hammering against the roof was deafening, like being inside a drum. I gripped the steering wheel, looking at my hands. These hands had written thousands of lines of code. These hands had built a future from nothing. These hands had signed the forms that gave Beatrice the weapon she used to kill me. A sound ripped out of my throat, a primal, animalistic noise that didn't sound human. I screamed. I screamed until my throat felt like I had swallowed broken glass. I smashed my fists against the dashboard until the plastic cracked. I thrashed against the seatbelt, hyperventilating, gasping for air that wouldn't fill my lungs. She knew about the loophole. She knew I wouldn't be able to prosecute her. She had looked me in the eye at Christmas, hugged me, and told me she was so proud of me, all while waiting for the balance to hit the right number. I slumped forward, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel, my body shaking with violent sobs. I was the smart one, I was the successful one. And now I was the fool sitting in a 2014 sedan with an empty bank account and a dying mother while my sister sipped champagne in first class. I was ruined. And my own blood was the one who pulled the trigger. I drove home in a blackout fugue state. I don't remember using my turn signals. I don't remember stopping at red lights. I just remember the sensation of my fingernails digging into the leather of the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I finally unlocked my apartment door, I didn't turn on the lights. I couldn't bear to see the life I had built. It all felt like a lie now. Every piece of furniture, every framed diploma, every trinket on the shelf was a testament to a stability that had just been liquidated. I dropped my keys on the entry table. They landed with a heavy metallic clatter that echoed too loudly in the silence. I walked into my bedroom and collapsed onto the mattress without taking off my damp clothes. I stared at the ceiling. A water stain in the corner looked like a weeping eye. I watched it for hours. The sun went down, dragging the gray light out of the room and replacing it with shadows that stretched like long, thin fingers. I didn't move. My stomach growled, a hollow, cramping pain that twisted my insides, but the thought of food made bile rise in my throat. I couldn't eat. Eating was for people who had futures. Eating was for people who hadn't just signed their mother's death warrant. I closed my eyes, but sleep was a distant country I couldn't visit. Every time I drifted off, I saw Beatrice's smile. I saw the way she had looked at Christmas, holding a glass of eggnog, telling me how much she admired my work ethic. Calculated. Every hug was a measurement. Every compliment was a distraction. I jolted awake, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was still dark. I rolled over and checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, just a glowing screen mocking me with the date. 1 day closer to Mom's deadline. I turned the phone off and threw it onto the floor. The next 24 hours were a blur of agony. I moved from the bed to the floor. The carpet was rough against my cheek, scratching my skin, grounding me in the misery. I watched the shadows move across the wall again. I counted the cracks in the plaster. I listened to the sounds of the building living around me. I heard the neighbor upstairs walking in heavy boots. I heard the couple next door arguing about whose turn it was to walk the dog. Normal problems, trivial, beautiful, solvable problems. I hated them. I hated them for having lives that weren't imploding. I got up only to drink water from the bathroom tap, cupping my hands like a beggar in my own home. My reflection in the mirror frightened me. My eyes were sunken, rimmed with dark, bruised circles. My hair was a tangled nest. I looked like a ghost haunting a crime scene. I went back to the bedroom and lay in the dark. Silence settled over the city again. It was the deep, heavy silence of the early morning, where the air feels thin and the world feels empty. I stared at the red digits of my alarm clock. 3:13 a.m. I watched the last digit change. 3:14 a.m. BZZZT. The sound cut through the room like a chainsaw. I flinched, my entire body seizing up. My phone. It was vibrating against the hardwood floor where I had thrown it. BZZZT. BZZZT. I stared at it in the darkness. The screen lit up the room with a ghostly blue light, casting long, frantic shadows that danced on the walls. Who calls at 3:14 a.m.? My heart stopped. Mom, it had to be the hospital. They were calling to tell me she was gone. They were calling to tell me her heart had given out while I was lying here feeling sorry for myself. I scrambled off the bed, my limbs tangled in the sheets, and crawled across the floor. I snatched the phone up with a trembling hand. I looked at the screen. It wasn't the hospital. It wasn't Mom's contact photo. It was a number I didn't recognize. Restricted. The area code was strange. It was from a city 300 miles north. A city I had never visited. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the green button. It was probably a bill collector, or a scammer, or maybe the police telling me they had found my car in a ditch because I hadn't realized it had been stolen too. My curiosity won out over my fear. I swiped right. I brought the phone to my ear, my breath hitching in my throat. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice cracked and dry from days of disuse. Silence. No, not silence. Noise, chaos. I heard a rhythmic, mechanical beeping in the background. Beep, beep, beep. It was fast, too fast. It sounded like a heart monitor racing toward failure. There was a shuffling sound like plastic wheels rolling over linoleum. And then breathing. Heavy, wet, ragged breathing right against the receiver. It sounded like someone drowning in air. "Who is this?" I asked, my grip on the phone tightening until the plastic creaked. A jagged intake of breath. Then came the sound that froze the blood in my veins. It was a scream, but not just any scream. It was high-pitched, terrified, and animalistic. It was the sound of a woman who was looking at death. Tamsin? The name ripped through the speaker, distorted by agony. I knew that voice, I knew that pitch. I had heard it when we were children and she fell out of the oak tree. I had heard it when she got her heart broken for the first time. It was Beatrice. B. I choked out, standing up in the dark room, my legs shaking violently. "Tamsin, help me," she shrieked, her voice breaking into a sob. "Oh God, please, it hurts so much." Background voices swelled. "Ma'am, you need to lie down." A stranger's voice barked in the distance. "Get the restraints." "No," Beatrice screamed, the sound tearing at my eardrums. "Call Tamsin, tell her I'm sorry, tell her." There was a loud crash, like a tray of metal instruments hitting the floor. The phone sounded like it was dropped, fumbling against hard surfaces. "Beatrice," I yelled into the darkness of my apartment. "Beatrice, where are you?" I heard a scuffle. Then the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it. The screen went black. The room plunged back into darkness. The silence that followed was heavier than before. My sister wasn't in the Maldives. She wasn't sipping champagne. She was 300 miles away, and she was screaming my name. "I'm Tamsin, 29 years old, and I used to believe that blood was thicker than water until my sister drained my bank account and left our mother to die." The silence that followed the disconnected call was heavier than the darkness in my apartment. I stood in the center of my bedroom, my phone clutched in a hand that had gone completely numb. My chest heaved. I couldn't get enough oxygen. The echo of Beatrice's scream was still bouncing around the walls of my skull. "Tamsin, help me." It wasn't the voice of the arrogant thief who had smirked at me over Christmas dinner. It was the voice of a child waking up from a nightmare. I stared at the black screen of my phone, willing it to light up again. My brain was trying to process impossible data. Beatrice was supposed to be on a beach. She was supposed to be halfway around the world, spending the $150,000 she had embezzled from our joint account. She wasn't supposed to be 300 miles north. She wasn't supposed to be screaming, "BZZZT." The phone vibrated in my hand, violent and sudden. I didn't hesitate this time. I swiped the screen and pressed the phone so hard against my ear it hurt. "Beatrice," I gasped. "This is the trauma center at Mercy General," a woman's voice said. It wasn't Beatrice. The voice was clipped, professional, and strained. It was the voice of someone who had seen too much blood tonight. "Who am I speaking to?" the woman asked sharply. This phone was recovered from the scene of a catastrophic accident. I'm Tamsin, I stammered, my knees finally giving out. I sank onto the edge of my bed. I'm her sister. Is she alive? She is currently being stabilized, the nurse said, her tone offering zero comfort. She has multiple fractures and severe internal trauma. She is delirious and has no identification on her person. I heard a noise in the background. It was a low, guttural moaning that ramped up into a shriek. Tamsin? The voice in the background was raw, shredded by smoke or screaming. It's my sister, tell them who I am. I closed my eyes. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. That's her, I whispered. That's Beatrice. Ma'am, listen to me, the nurse said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. We need to identify her to treat her properly. We found her in a vehicle on the I-95 embankment. It looks like she lost control at speeds exceeding 120 miles per hour. 120. My stomach turned over. What kind of car? I asked. It was a stupid question. It didn't matter, but my brain needed to know where the money went. A Ferrari, the nurse said. Brand new, red, or what's left of it. The word hit me like a physical slap. A Ferrari. My mother was lying in a hospice bed, counting out her pills because we couldn't afford the surgery anymore. And Beatrice had bought a Ferrari. And ma'am, the nurse continued, clearly reading from a clipboard or a police report. The vehicle was filled with merchandise. We have recovered several high-value items from the wreckage, though most are destroyed. Merchandise, I repeated hollowly. Designer bags, the nurse listed, her voice tinged with a subtle judgment. Jewelry boxes. And several empty bottles of vodka were found in the passenger footwell. The world seemed to stop spinning. I sat there in the dark, the phone pressed to my ear, and the picture formed in my mind with agonizing clarity. She hadn't fled the country. She had gone on a joyride. She had taken the money meant to save our mother's life and blown it in 48 hours on a luxury bender. She had bought a supercar she couldn't drive and filled it with purses she didn't need. She had gotten drunk on expensive vodka and wrapped my mother's future around a telephone pole. Tamsin, Beatrice screamed again in the background. It hurts, make it stop. My heart did something strange then. A minute ago it had been racing with panic. It had been breaking for my little sister. But as the nurse listed the inventory of the crash, the shopping bags, the vodka, the sports car, my heart stopped racing. It slowed down. It cooled. It hardened into a block of ice in the center of my chest. I listened to her wailing. It didn't sound like my sister anymore. It sounded like the consequences finally catching up to a ghost. Is she going to survive? I asked. My voice was steady, too steady. It's critical, the nurse said. We need you to come here. We need consent for surgery if she goes under, and we need her insurance information. Insurance? Beatrice didn't have insurance. She had canceled her policy 6 months ago to buy concert tickets. She had the cash, though, or she had the cash. Now the cash was twisted metal and broken glass on the side of a highway 300 miles away. I'll be there, I said. Hurry, the nurse said. She keeps asking for you. She's hysterical. I heard, I said. Tamsin. Beatrice's voice drifted through the phone again, weaker this time, bubbling with something wet. Please. I didn't say I love you. I didn't say it's going to be okay. I couldn't. The image of my mother's tired, gray face superimposed itself over the sound of Beatrice's pain. My mother, who had worked double shifts for 20 years to put us through school. My mother, who was currently sleeping in a rented hospital bed in her living room because we couldn't afford the facility anymore. Beatrice had taken that sacrifice and turned it into a pile of scrap metal. I'm coming, I said. I hung up the phone. I sat in the silence for a long moment. The rain was still hammering against the window, but I didn't feel the dampness anymore. I stood up and walked to the closet. I took off my wet clothes. I put on a clean pair of jeans and a thick sweater. I brushed my hair. I looked at myself in the mirror. The ghost was gone. The woman staring back at me looked dangerous. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set. I grabbed my keys from the entry table. I walked out of my apartment and locked the door behind me. I didn't run to my car. I walked. I had a 3-hour drive ahead of me. 3 hours to think about what I was going to say to the sister who had murdered our mother to buy a purse. 3 hours to decide if I was going to hold her hand or if I was going to watch her suffer. I got into my 2014 sedan. The engine sputtered when I turned the key, a stark contrast to the roar of the Ferrari Beatrice had destroyed. I pulled out onto the empty street. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove north into the dark toward the sound of the screaming. I'm Tamsin Vance, 29 years old, and I stood in the sterile hallway of a trauma center, realizing that the only thing more expensive than saving a life is cleaning up the mess of a wasted one. The drive north had taken 3 hours. I hadn't listened to music. I hadn't cried. I had just gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and a cold, heavy hatred that sat in my stomach like lead. I parked my rusted sedan between two gleaming SUVs in the hospital lot. The sunrise was bleeding orange across the horizon, mocking me with its beauty. My mother was dying in a dark living room 300 miles away because we couldn't afford her medication. And my sister was somewhere inside this massive brick building because she didn't know how to handle a Ferrari at 120 miles per hour. I walked through the automatic sliding doors. The air conditioning hit me instantly. It was freezing. I walked past the security desk, my boots squeaking on the polished linoleum. I followed the signs to the trauma ICU. Every step felt heavier than the last. I wasn't walking toward a reunion. I was walking toward a crime scene. I found the nurse's station. A woman with tired eyes looked up at me over a bank of monitors. "I'm here for Beatrice Vance," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was flat. It was the voice of a stranger. "Family?" she asked. "Sister," I said. She looked at me for a long second, her gaze flickering down to my jeans and sweater, then back to my face. "Room 304, she said softly. "Prepare yourself, it's quite severe." I nodded. I didn't thank her. I walked down the corridor, counting the numbers. 302, 303, 304. The door was open. I stopped at the threshold. The first thing that hit me wasn't the sight of her, it was the smell. It was a thick, cloying mixture of industrial antiseptic and something sharp and acrid. Burnt rubber. It smelled like a skid mark. It smelled like charred hair and gasoline, barely masked by the bleach they used to scrub the floors. My stomach turned over violently. I swallowed back the bile and forced my feet to move. I stepped into the room. The only light came from the blinking machinery stacked around the bed. I looked at the figure lying in the center of the tangle of wires. I stopped breathing. If I hadn't been told this was Beatrice, I wouldn't have known. Her face, usually perfectly made up and smug, was a swollen, grotesque mask. Her skin was a map of angry black stitches and deep purple bruising that distorted her features into something monstrous. Her left eye was swollen shut, the size of a tennis ball. Her lips were split and crusted with dried blood, but it was her body that made me flinch. Both of her legs were suspended in the air, hung in a complex web of traction pulleys and weights. She looked like a broken marionette that had been cut from its strings and then hastily tied back together. A cast encased her right arm all the way to the shoulder. She was broken. She was shattered. And she was awake. Her one good eye, bloodshot and terrified, swiveled toward the door. When she saw me, a sound ripped out of her throat. It wasn't a word, it was a gurgle of pure relief. Tam, she rasped. The sound was wet. She tried to lift her head, but the neck brace pinned her down. Tammy, she cried, the tears instantly leaking from her eye and tracking through the blood on her cheek. She tried to reach out with her casted arm. Her fingers, swollen like sausages, twitched in the air. You came, she sobbed. I knew you'd come. I didn't move toward the bed. I stayed near the door, my back pressed against the frame. I looked at the traction weights holding her legs together. I looked at the IV drips pumping fluids into her veins. I'm here, I said. My voice was ice. She didn't hear the coldness. She only heard the presence of her safety net. It hurts, she whined, her voice rising in pitch. It hurts so bad, Tamsin. They won't give me the good stuff anymore. They said my blood pressure is too low. She took a ragged breath. You have to help me, she rushed on, the panic setting in. The doctor. He came in 10 minutes ago. He said I need emergency surgery on my pelvis. He said I'm bleeding internally around the bone. I stared at her. Okay, I said. No, it's not okay, she shrieked, wincing as the movement jarred her broken ribs. They won't do it. They're stalling. They said they can't book the OR without a deposit or valid insurance approval. She looked at me with that desperate, entitlement-fueled gaze I had known my entire life. I told them to call you, she sobbed. I told them my sister handles the finances. I told them you'd pay the deposit. My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. She had stolen every penny I had. She had stolen our mother's hospice fund. She had spent $150,000 in 2 days on a Ferrari and vodka. And now, lying in the wreckage of that theft, she was asking me to pay for her salvation. How much is the deposit, Beatrice? I asked quietly. 10,000, she cried. It's just 10,000 to get the surgery started. Please, Tamsin, go to the billing office. Give them your card. I don't want to lose my legs. Please. She was reaching for me again. Her fingers were clawing at the empty air between us. She thought I was her savior one last time. She thought I was the big sister who would fix the toy she broke. She didn't realize that she hadn't just broken a toy this time. She had broken our lives. $10,000, I repeated. Yes, just put it on the credit card, she begged. I'll pay you back, I swear. Once I get out of here, I'll fix everything. Just make the pain stop. I looked at the monitor beeping steadily beside her head. I looked at the expensive traction equipment. I looked at the nurse who had quietly stepped into the room behind me, holding a clipboard, waiting for the credit card that Beatrice promised was coming. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity, absolute, terrifying clarity. I took a step forward, moving out of the shadows and to the foot of her bed. I gripped the plastic rail. Beatrice looked at me, hope flooding her one open eye. You'll do it, she whispered. You'll go pay them. I looked at her broken face. I thought about the Ferrari wrapped around a telephone pole. I thought about the empty pill bottles on my mother's nightstand. I can't pay them, Beatrice, I said. Her face fell. What? She choked. Why just use your savings? Use the joint account. I leaned in closer. The smell of burnt rubber was overpowering now. I don't have any savings, I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely contain. And the joint account is empty. Beatrice froze, her eye widened. Because you emptied it, I said. The silence in the room was sudden and violent. The beeping of the monitor seemed to speed up. You took it all, I said, my voice rising. $150,000. You took it to buy the car that you crashed into a wall. Beatrice flinched. Tamsin, no, she stammered. I was going to. It was an investment. An investment? I laughed. It was a harsh, jagged sound. You bought a Ferrari, Beatrice. You filled it with vodka, and you destroyed it. I pointed at her legs. That surgery you need, I asked. The money for that surgery is scattered across I-95. You spent your own lifeline. But Mom, she stuttered, grasping for leverage. Does Mom know you can't let me suffer? Mom wouldn't want me to suffer. Mom is dying, I snapped. Mom is at home dying in pain because you stole her medical fund to go on a joyride. Beatrice started to sob again, loud, ugly, heaving cries. I didn't mean to, she screamed. I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted one weekend. Fix it, Tamsin. You always fix it. Find the money, sell something, get a loan. She was screaming at me. She was demanding I go into debt to fix the damage caused by her theft of my fortune. I looked at the nurse. The nurse looked uncomfortable. She looked down at her clipboard. Ms. Vance, the nurse said softly to me, without the deposit. I know, I said. I looked back at Beatrice. She was wailing now, a high-pitched sound of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. I don't have $10,000, Beatrice, I said. I don't even have gas money to get home. Don't leave me, she shrieked, trying to sit up, the machine screaming in alarm as her heart rate spiked. You can't leave me here. I let go of the bed rail. My hands were shaking. I felt lightheaded. I'm not leaving, I said. I pulled a plastic chair from the corner of the room. I dragged it to the side of the bed. The scraping sound was loud in the hysterical room. I sat down. I crossed my legs. I'm going to sit right here, I said, and I'm going to watch you live with the consequences of what you did. Beatrice stared at me, her mouth hanging open, the screams dying in her throat. For the first time in her life, she looked at me and didn't see a sister. She saw a mirror, and she was terrified of what was looking back. I'm Tamsin Vance, 29 years old, and I am the lead cybersecurity architect for one of the largest fintech firms on the East Coast. I sat down in the hard plastic chair next to her bed. The vinyl seat was cold against my legs. I pulled my laptop out of my tote bag. The brushed aluminum felt heavy and solid in my hands, an anchor in the chaotic sea of beeping monitors and antiseptic smells. Water, Beatrice croaked from the bed. Her voice was a dry rattle. Tamsin, please, she whined. My throat is like sandpaper, just pour me a glass. I didn't look at her. I opened the lid of my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a sharp, clinical blue light across the darkened room. It illuminated the bruising on her cheekbones, making the purple splotches look almost black. Did you hear me? She rasped, a flicker of her old impatience breaking through the pain. I need water, now. The nurse will be round in 10 minutes, I said calmly. My voice was steady. My fingers found the home row on the keyboard. I'm thirsty now, she snapped, then winced as the effort pulled at the stitches in her lip. Stop playing on your computer and help me, I'm your sister. I ignored her. I typed in my BIOS password. My fingers flew across the keys. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound was rhythmic, precise, and aggressive in the silence of the room. What are you doing? She asked, her one good eye narrowing. Are you emailing Mom? Don't you dare email Mom. I stopped typing for a split second. I turned my head slowly to look at her. You never actually asked what I do for a living, did you, Beatrice? I asked softly. She blinked, confused by the pivot. What? She muttered. You work with computers, you fix banking apps or something, it's boring. Boring, I repeated. I turned back to the screen. I build fintech security protocols, I said, typing a command line that opened a black terminal window. I design the algorithms that flag suspicious behavior for multi-billion-dollar hedge funds. I build the walls that keep hackers out. I hit enter. A stream of green text cascaded down the screen. And because I'm paranoid, I continued, my voice low, and because I know that security breaches usually come from the people closest to you, I built a backdoor into my own private accounts. Beatrice went very quiet. The only sound was the whoosh of the ventilator assisting her breathing. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," I said, typing in a final authorization code, "that when you drain the joint account, you triggered a silent alarm on my server." I rotated the laptop on my knees. I angled the screen so she could see it. She squinted, trying to focus through the haze of pain medication and trauma. "Look," I commanded. She looked. "That's a transaction log," I explained, pointing to the glowing white text. "See that timestamp? That was 2 days ago. 10:14 a.m. That's when you transferred the bulk of the money out." I I told you," she stammered, sweat breaking out on her forehead. "I bought the car, it's gone." "You spent 65,000 on the car," I corrected her. "You blew another 5,000 on clothes and alcohol." I tapped the screen. "But here is the remaining $80,000. Beatrice's eye widened. She tried to sit up, but the traction pulleys jerked her leg and she screamed in pain. She collapsed back against the pillows, panting. "You found it," she gasped. "You found the rest, Tamsin, thank God. You can pay for the surgery, you can pay the deposit right now." I didn't move, I didn't reach for my credit card, I just watched the numbers blinking on the screen. "You didn't just spend it, Beatrice," I said, my voice turning hard. "You tried to double it. You transferred $80,000 to Azure Gaming Intel." She froze. "It's an offshore gambling site," I said. "Unregulated, based in the Cayman Islands." "You were going to bet our mother's hospice money on online blackjack, weren't you?" "I was going to win it back," she cried, the desperation shrill and piercing. "I was going to double it and put it back before you noticed. It was a sure thing." "There is no such thing as a sure thing," I said. I leaned closer to her. "But here is the part you don't understand," I whispered. "My security protocol, it recognizes transfers to blacklisted gambling IP addresses. It doesn't block them immediately, it puts them in a holding pattern." I pointed to the status bar next to the money. It read status pending admin lock. "I froze the funds," I said. Beatrice stared at the words. Her brain was trying to catch up. You froze it?" she asked. "Before the site could process your deposit," I said. "The money didn't hit their account. It didn't stay in ours. It's sitting in a digital purgatory that only I have the key to." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The money wasn't gone. The money was right there. I had the $80,000. I had the 10,000 needed for her pelvic surgery. I had the power to stop her pain. "Tamsin," she breathed, a terrified smile trembling on her split lip. "Oh my God, you have it. You saved it. You can pay them. Go to the billing office, please. My hip. It feels like it's on fire." I pulled the laptop back. I turned it around so the screen faced me again. I rested my hands on the keyboard. "I could pay them," I agreed. "Yes, go," she urged. "But that money isn't yours," I said, "and it isn't mine." I looked her dead in the eye. "That is Mom's money. But I need it," she screamed, spit flying from her mouth. "I am your sister. I am lying here broken. You can't just sit there with 80 grand on a screen and let them leave me like this." "You tried to gamble it away," I said. "If I hadn't written that code, the money would be gone. You would have lost it all in an hour." "But I didn't," she argued. "You stopped it, so use it to help me." I looked at the release funds button on my screen, then I looked at the report fraud button. "If I release the funds to pay for your surgery," I said slowly, "I am validating your theft. I am spending Mom's dying wish on fixing your mistakes." "Tamsin," she wailed. "But if I report it as unauthorized fraud," I said, my finger hovering over the enter key, "the bank claws the money back into the original account. It locks everything down for investigation. It returns the money to Mom." Beatrice stopped breathing. She saw where my finger was hovering. She saw the cold calculation in my eyes. She realized for the first time that the little sister she had bullied, used, and stolen from was holding a loaded gun. And I was aiming it right at her future. You wouldn't, she whispered. You wouldn't let me lose my legs. I watched the color drain from her bruised face. She looked like a ghost. I'm not the one who gambled with your life, Beatrice, I said. You did. I looked at the screen. I made my choice. I'm Tamsin Vance, 29 years old, and I am the lead cybersecurity architect for one of the largest fintech firms on the East Coast. The cursor on my screen blinked. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse. On, off, on, off. It was the heartbeat of my decision. Beatrice was hyperventilating on the bed, her chest heaving against the thin hospital gown. The monitors around her were a chorus of frantic beeps mirroring her panic. Tamsin, she wheezed, her voice cracking. Just hit the button, just release it. I'll pay you back. I swear on my life, I will pay you back every cent. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the woman who had tormented me in high school. I saw the sister who had skipped my college graduation because she had a hangover. I saw the daughter who had stolen from a dying woman to buy a sports car and play online blackjack. You don't have a life to swear on anymore, Beatrice, I said softly. You sold it. My finger descended. I didn't slam the key. I didn't make it dramatic. I simply applied 2 ounces of pressure to the enter key. Click. The command line on my screen scrolled rapidly. Executing script, Fraud Recovery Protocol 09. Target, Azure Gaming INTL Holding. Destination, VANCE Estate Primary. Status, Processing. A loading bar appeared. It filled with agonizing slowness. 20%, 50%. Beatrice was watching my face, searching for a sign of salvation. Did you do it? She asked, tears cutting tracks through the dried blood on her cheeks. Is it paid? Status completed. Funds secured. I closed the laptop. The snap of the lid was final. I slipped the computer back into my tote bag. I took a deep breath, inhaling the sharp scent of isopropyl alcohol and the underlying metallic tang of old blood. It's done, I said. Beatrice let out a sob that sounded like a wounded animal. Her head fell back against the pillow, her eyes closing in overwhelming relief. Oh, thank God, she whispered. Thank you, Tamsin. I knew you wouldn't leave me. I knew you loved me. When is the surgery? I stood up. My legs felt stiff. I smoothed down the front of my skirt. I didn't pay the hospital, Beatrice, I said. Her eyes snapped open. The relief vanished, replaced by a confusion that was rapidly curdling into terror. What? She asked. I recovered 90% of the funds, I said, my voice clinical and detached. And I sent them back to Mom's account. I watched the words hit her. I flagged the transaction as criminal fraud, I continued. The bank has now locked the estate account. No one can touch it, not me. And certainly not you. But, she stammered, her hands clawing at the sheets. But the deposit, the $10,000 for the hip surgery, you said you had it. I did have it, I said. Now the bank has it. You can't do that, she screamed. The sound tore through her throat, raw and violent. She tried to lunge at me, but her broken pelvis anchored her to the mattress in a spasm of agony. She shrieked, a high, keening sound of pure physical torture. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. Instead, I leaned in. I leaned in so close that my face was inches from hers. I could smell the sourness of her fear. I could smell the copper of the blood drying on her lip. I can do it, I whispered. And I just did. I reached into my bag again. Beatrice's eyes darted to my hands, perhaps hoping for a checkbook. I pulled out a thick, folded document. It was stapled at the top. The paper was heavy legal bond. I dropped it onto her chest. It landed with a dull thud. What is this? She gasped, her hands shaking too hard to lift it. That is a copy of the police report I filed an hour ago, I said, and the civil suit for felony embezzlement. She stared at the papers. I gave the digital trail to the detectives, I said. The IP addresses, the timestamps, the transfer logs, proof that you accessed Mom's accounts without authorization, proof that you wired the money to an offshore gambling site. I'm your sister, she whimpered. You're sending me to jail. You stole $65,000 that we will never get back, I said. You destroyed Mom's peace of mind, you wrecked a car, you shattered your own body. I straightened up, towering over her bed. I am not sending you to jail, Beatrice. You drove yourself there. I walked to the foot of the bed. I picked up the plastic chart holder hooked to the rail. I pulled out the consent forms I had signed only hours ago, the ones accepting financial responsibility as her next of kin. I took a pen from my pocket. I drew a heavy black line through my signature. I wrote REVOKED in block letters next to it. What are you doing? She cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch again. I am formally revoking my sponsorship of your care, I said. I am not your guardian, I am not your bank. I shoved the chart back into the holder. The hospital will be seeking payment from you directly, I said. They will bill you. If you can't pay, they will stabilize you and discharge you to a state facility when you are clear to move. You won't be getting the private room. You won't be getting the best surgeon in the state. Tamsin, please, she begged. My hip, I can't walk, it hurts. I know, I said. I picked up my bag. Pain is a great teacher, Beatrice. Maybe you'll finally learn something. I turned my back on her. TAMSIN, she screamed. Don't you walk away from me, TAMSIN. I walked toward the door. Her screams followed me, desperate and wet with tears. Mom would hate you for this, she yelled. I stopped at the threshold. My hand hovered over the door handle. That one stung. It burrowed under my ribs and twisted. I looked back over my shoulder. Beatrice was a wreck of tubes, bruises, and malice. Mom isn't here, I said quietly, because you stole the money meant to keep her comfortable. I opened the door. The hallway was bright and loud. Nurses were moving past with carts. A doctor was typing at a station. I stepped out. The door swung shut behind me, muting the sound of my name being screamed over and over again. A nurse looked up from her computer, startled by the noise coming from room 304. Ms. Vance, she asked, stepping toward me. Is everything all right? Do you need a doctor? I looked at her. My hands were trembling slightly, the adrenaline finally starting to crash. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. I'm fine, I said. But the patient in 304 needs to speak with your billing department immediately. Oh, the nurse said, confused. Are you leaving? Yes, I said. I started walking down the long, sterile corridor. I'm all done here. I'm Tamsin Vance, 29 years old, and I just amputated my own family tree to save my mother's life. Beatrice shrieked my name. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a plea. It was a sound of absolute, jagged desperation that tore through the sterile air of the third floor. It echoed off the linoleum tiles. It bounced against the glass of the nurse's station. TAMSIN? The syllable broke in the middle, fracturing into a sob that I could feel vibrating in my own throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but my face remained a mask of frozen porcelain. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked back now, if I saw her broken body writhing on that bed, if I saw the terror in the eyes that used to look at me with such disdain, I might crumble. I might undo it all. So I fixed my eyes on the red exit sign hanging at the end of the corridor. It was a beacon. It was a promise. I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of running footsteps behind me. 2 security guards in dark uniforms rushed past me, their radios crackling with static and urgent codes. They were running toward the screaming woman in room 304. They were running to restrain the sister I had just effectively orphaned. The wind from their movement brushed against my arm, cooling the sweat that had slicked my skin. I kept walking, 1 step, 2 steps. My heels clicked on the floor, a sharp, deliberate metronome counting down the seconds of my old life. I reached the elevator bank. I pressed the down button. The plastic felt cool and greasy under my fingertip. I waited. Behind me, the screaming had stopped, replaced by the low, urgent murmur of medical staff and the mechanical beep of alarms being reset. The silence was worse than the noise. The silence meant it was over. The elevator doors slid open with a cheerful ding that felt obscenely bright for the moment. I stepped inside. I was alone. The doors closed, sealing me into a stainless steel box. I watched the numbers descend. 321. My reflection stared back at me from the polished metal doors. I looked wrecked. My blouse was wrinkled. My mascara was smudged beneath my left eye. But my shoulders were back. My spine was straight. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't carrying the weight of Beatrice's bad decisions. The lobby was awash of activity. Families huddled in chairs, clutching coffee cups and hope. A gift shop clerk was arranging balloons. They didn't know that upstairs a life had just been dismantled. They didn't know that I was the demolition crew. I walked toward the sliding glass doors. They parted for me like the Red Sea. The heat hit me first. It was a humid, suffocating East Coast afternoon, but to me it felt like a baptism. The sun was blinding. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, letting the light burn through my eyelids, scrubbing away the image of Beatrice's bloodied face. I walked to the curb and stopped. My hands were shaking. Not a little tremor, but a violent, uncontrollable shake that rattled the bracelets on my wrist. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my phone. The screen was bright. I navigated to my favorites. I pressed Mom. It rang once, twice. Tamsin, her voice was weak, thin as paper, breathless from the medication. Is everything okay? I took a deep breath, inhaling the exhaust of a passing ambulance and the scent of warm asphalt. It's handled, Mom, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, stronger, deeper. What about the bank? She asked, the anxiety spiking in her tone. The mortgage, Beatrice said she needed it for. Beatrice was confused, I lied. It was the last lie I would ever tell for my sister. There was a banking error, I said steadily. I fixed it. The funds are back in your account. The mortgage is paid for the next 6 months. Your treatment is fully funded. I heard her exhale, a long, ragged sound of pure relief. Oh, thank God, she whispered. I was so worried. I didn't know what we were going to do. You're a good girl, Tamsin. You always fix everything. Tears pricked my eyes. I know, Mom, I said. Rest now, I'll come see you tomorrow. And Beatrice, she asked. Is she okay? Did she get her surgery? I looked back at the looming brick facade of the hospital. I thought about the police report sitting on Beatrice's chest. I thought about the revoked signature. Beatrice is exactly where she needs to be, I said. Good, Mom murmured, fading fast. That's good. I hung up. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was a lifeline. It was a weapon. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled down to Beatrice. The picture was a selfie she had taken of us 2 Christmases ago. She looked glamorous, pouting at the camera. I looked tired, standing in the background, holding the tray of drinks she had ordered me to fetch. I stared at that face. I stared at the face of the person who had stolen $65,000 from a dying woman. I tapped Edit. I scrolled to the bottom. Delete contact. My thumb hovered. This was the real surgery. This was the amputation. I pressed it. Are you sure you want to delete this contact? Yes, I whispered to the empty sidewalk. The name vanished, but that wasn't enough. I went to my recent calls. I found the hospital's main line. I found Beatrice's cell number. Block caller, block caller. I lowered the phone. The screen went black. A A taxi pulled up to the curb, the driver looking at me expectantly. I didn't move toward it. I just stood there breathing. My lungs expanded fully, pressing against my ribs, taking in more air than I thought possible. The invisible hand that had been squeezing my throat since I was 16 years old was gone. The debt was paid, not in money, but in boundaries. I checked my watch. I had a meeting in 2 hours. I had a life to get back to. I turned away from the hospital, putting the sun on my face and the shadow behind me. I was Tamsin Vance. I was whole again, and I no longer had a sister.